Nah, bro, listen to me, bro. Listen.
We have to suck his cock now.
Yo, bro, shut.
Bring
So,
it
like,
out, Lucky.
You know, man. Like,
You know, man.
Shut the fuck up!
Yo, what's up guys? So, in today's video, I'll be going ahead and making a few Plants vs. Zombies 2 characters in the Garden Warfare 2 art style. Now, this idea derived from the comment section of my previous video. Well, not that one, but the one before that. There were a couple people in the comment section who were saying, hey, these characters look like they can be in Garden Warfare 2. Now, I disagree. I appreciate the comments, and that's very kind of you guys to say that, especially the fact that you guys would even compare my work to that of a professional. I really do appreciate that. But the reason why I disagree is because I can do you one better. I can make it in the Garden Warfare 2 art style. Well, at least to the best of my ability. I wouldn't consider myself a professional by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe like intermediate, maybe within the mid-range of intermediate if I had to guess. You kind of get the point. Anyways, let's go and start this video off with our first character, Blast Spinner. So, as per usual, I start this character off by starting off with a square, subbed up. Before I continue playing this bit of the video, I just want to really quickly say, whenever I say leaves, I mean petals, and whenever I say him, I mean her. Dividing it, applying a cast modifier, and setting the scale to 1. This pretty much just gives you a sphere, but I prefer it because the topology tends to be a little bit cleaner to work with. From there on out, I kind of dig a little hole in the center, the top center of the sphere, and then I create a little bit of a crown shape at the top. This is so that way I can then later duplicate what I currently have, and then put that inside the mesh I already have. As you can kind of see in the reference image there, you can see that it's kind of like an outer shell, then there's an inner one, and then inner until it gets to the spike at the top. So being able to just duplicate these inside one another would just make working with this model a lot easier. I then go ahead and I change the direction of each little spike at the top of his head, because I find it that it gives it a little bit more of an interesting shape going on, like it's not just a flat, like a flat triangle. I like to add a little bit of wiggle in there, have it maybe pushed slightly to the right, but then the higher it gets, it goes a little bit more to the left, and then maybe a little bit more forward, backward. It's all, I wouldn't even say relative, but just very random. Have some fun with it. The eyes and the mouth were pretty straightforward. I didn't necessarily struggle with giving him eyes and a mouth, but rather how should they look. And you'll see here that I try to be somewhat creative about it. By giving him a bit of a chin, I try to make an interesting shape with his eyes that are kind of like his secondary eyes. They kind of protrude outward a little bit. I really didn't like this stuff. I eventually go back and I just completely get rid of it. Later on, you'll see, I even go as far to give him eye bags. I wasn't very confident about it though. I just wanted to see if I could make it work or get used to it. I think it just looked really bad. So I ended up getting rid of it. And normally with the Garden Warfare style, I find it that the characters are a little bit more detailed than you'd think. But I think with this character, honestly, it needed to be simpler rather than not. I think majority of the detail goes towards the textures, and even when I was finished, I felt like I still could have done more with the textures. But, I mean, it's alright. I think it suffices, and I think it looks good enough. Before I continue, I do start to mess around with the face some more again. As you can see, this is when I completely get rid of any oddities that I had initially tried to be a little bit experimental with. Things like the chin. I just think that stuff like that didn't really feel natural to be put on the character. It almost felt forced, tacked on. Like the character doesn't need a chin. Like why does it, you know? It also took away a little bit from its cuteness, which I think is something very important to this character design. It's supposed to look very cute. So to try and keep that, I kind of got rid of some of these extra details because it just looks cuter without it. Now, when it came to working with the leaves or his feet, I won't lie, the beginning was a little bit miserable. These looked really bad. I think what I was doing here initially was, you could almost think of it like prototyping, where I was just kind of sketching out how could I fit the leaves in there. So what I'm doing here is like a very lazy model of a leaf. I wasn't really trying too hard here, but I do try and make it look believable. And what I mean by believable is, maybe I shouldn't use the term believable, but rather I do try and make it somewhat detailed. But it's just not working. It looks really bad. And, you know, that's okay. It happens. Sometimes you'll make something and it just looks bad. And I think that this was a bad day. It was a bit of a bad art day because I think I decided to start working on the leaves on a separate session, picking up where I left off. And it wasn't good. It wasn't good. It was terrible. This looks atrocious. So I think what I did is, after that, I took the day off and I waited till the next day. And what I decided to do is I decided to kind of look at the anatomy of a spider. And I also decided to take a look at the plant that this character was based off of. And I've noticed, and I'll go ahead and put a picture up for you guys to see, how the bottom of it looks. And that's pretty much where I connected the dots. I realized, oh my god, this would be such a good idea if I gave it roots, but it's also something similar to what you would see with characters like Sunflower, Chomper, or Pea Shooter. And I could kind of take what they did with those characters, where they have these like skinny little like roots as acting as feet, and put leaves over them. It's fucking genius. And so that's exactly what I did. Now, granted, I can't take all the credit. I do remember I was talking with a few friends, and I remember they suggested that to help with the leaves, I could potentially try integrating the roots with this character, and that was a pretty good idea, so thank you to them for telling me that. And then I eventually just did some research, and then, you know, like I said, I kind of connected the dots, and this is what I came up with. And I think it turned out fantastic. I think that this was the direction that I should have gone initially. For the leaves, I don't really have much to say. They're just kind of leaves. I do think that I did alright with the general shape of the leaves, but I could have done way better with the texturing, and in the future, I know how I'd go about doing them. And you'll even see later on how I handle one of the leaves for one of the other characters, and I just think that that ended up turning out way better here. But to kind of explain what I'm trying to do here, these aren't actually leaves, these are more petals. These are petals of the plant this character is based off of. I forget the name of the plant, and I'm going to be so honest with you right now. I really don't care enough to pause this recording and look it up right now. Like, I'm already recording this voiceover. I don't feel like doing that. I'm just going to be honest with you. So bear with me here when I say the plant that this character is based off of, alright? But I noticed that these are petals, and so I'm like, alright, well, who else has petals? And the one that has kind of traditional looking petals in the game would be Sunflower. I mean, no shit. Now, when I was placing the petals down on top of the roots, I realized that there wasn't enough space for the leaves to fit in. Petals, there wasn't enough space for the petals to fit in. So I used a mask modifier to mask slice each root off of the base root, I guess you could say, and I then just kind of spaced it out and figured out how I wanted the petals to be placed, before then rejoining each root like back to the main root and then smoothing that out again, and then, you know, making it look like it's all connected. After that, I tried figuring out ways to make the body look connected, because I took a lot of looks at the spider anatomy to see, okay, well, how does a spider connect its head to its body? How does that work? I really struggled to figure out what I was looking at, but then I also kind of realized that this doesn't, I don't think this looks very good. Like, in terms of like animation, I didn't really like how it looked. And I also felt like it would have just made this model look a little bit too creepy for Garden Warfare. So I just took the Citron approach and I just put a cylinder in between, you know, just that simple, really. And then I applied a displacement map to kind of give it that bumpy look as well. That's all I really did. Simple yet effective, and also no one's really going to notice it. I think that once you do notice it, you're not going to have that much of a problem with it. But if you were to animate this character, you could now have her backside rotate separately from her head and such. So I think it was worth it at the end. From there on out, I just start giving texture to everything. As you can see, that's what I'm doing with the roots. I'm kind of giving them a bit of texture using the clay strips brush. Just giving it a bunch of lines. Same thing with the leaves as well. Sorry, petals. I keep on saying leaves. Petals. In hindsight, with the petals, I really would have much rather just used shaders for those. I think that there's a way to go about it. I just think that the way I was making them was kind of stupid, but... you know, I gotta let it go. I gotta let it go. Then for finishing touches, really, I just start working... Well, these aren't finishing touches, actually. We haven't even got to those yet. I just started working on the textures. And I also decided to give her body a bit of a gradient. I've noticed that her character in PvZ2 also has a gradient, but it's not even just because of that. It's also just because Garden Warfare 2 in general is no stranger to gradients. I mean, they absolutely love using them all over the place. And you'll see what I mean later on in the video. And then I move on to the eyes, and I noticed that the eyes actually aren't a complete black. They are more of like, I think it's called like an olive color, but like a very, very dark olive color. There's probably a name for that I don't know. Pretty much, it's just like a darker yellowish green. That's pretty much what it is. And I use a gradient to kind of give it some shine at the bottom. Give it a lighter shade of that dark green. As you can see, both in the reference and in the model, you see what I mean. And I think it ended up looking pretty decent. I also gave it a Fresnel tint, although that's something that I don't know how I would do in the Garden Warfare 2 engine if I were to import these characters into the game. But I know how to do it in Blender, so I decided to give her a Fresnel tint to kind of coincide with the little shine that exists at the bottom of her eyes. I also decided to give her a lot of spots because I've noticed that both the zombies and plants, not every plant, but some plants, characters like Chomper, I think Citron, Pea Shooter definitely, they love having spots around their characters. I'm pretty sure all the zombies do this, although the type of spots they have are kind of different to what the plants have. They're not really the same, but the philosophy is still there. So I just kind of gave her a bunch of spots around the place. I was thinking of doing it for her back, but I never bothered to because I didn't think it was necessary. That's also just a fancy way of me saying I kind of got lazy. Later on, I eventually do give her eyelashes because, in case you don't know, Blast Spinner is a female. And I also think that it's just kind of like a cute little addition to the character that gives it some more personality. Now, going back to the petals, I tried using shaders to make the textures look nicer. I think the way I was going about it was not right because I ended up giving up on making shaders for the petals. I think I know how to go about making them, but I won't lie to you. It bested me. Shaders bested me on this one, you know. I'm going 0-1 right now with the shaders. Yeah, no. I tried adding streaks of different color variation of the dominant color. So the dominant color here was... It was pink, although I used more of a red just because with the lighting preset that I was working with, it kind of brightened up the colors of the leaves. So what's a brighter red? Pink. So I decided to, well, in second guess I'm looking at it, it's more of like an orange-ish pink, hence why I leaned more towards the red as well. But you get my point. Keeping in mind the lighting that I was working with, I decided to make it more of like a reddish, so that way when light is casted onto the leaves, it brightens up a little and it looks more like a orange pinkish color. And so I tried giving it random streaks of that color, and I think it looks alright for the most part, but I do think it could have looked better. And lastly, once I'm done with all that, I then decide to give her a gradient on her roots, because I've noticed that with characters like Pea Shooter and Sunflower, I'm not too sure about Sunflower, but at least Pea Shooter, I'm pretty confident that he kind of goes from more of a green color down to a like yellowish color, and so I tried replicating a similar effect here. Once I'm done with that, I'm done with the sculpt, so here's how Blast Spinner would look like if she was in Garden Warfare 2. Alright, the next character I decided to make was Cardio Zombie. Now apparently Cardio Zombie he was only in like, not limited time events, but he's not part of like PvZ2 base game. He's part of like these events that they do in the game I have not played PvZ2, like just regular PvZ2, in a hot minute, so I actually didn't even know that this character existed. The reason why I decided to try Cardio Zombie was because I had a comment on my last video, and someone asked me I should try some zombies next, and I remember like thinking to myself, wait, yeah, why didn't I do any of the zombies? So I guess I must have just completely forgotten that they existed and only did the plants. So I'm like, alright, let's do a zombie. And initially I was going to do Chicken Wrangler, but the reason why I opted out of doing Chicken Wrangler Zombie was because the chickens he has around him already exist in Garden Warfare 2, and I mean, the best option for me to do there would to just be use the chickens from Garden Warfare because, well, that's how they would look like. They're literally in the game. But I didn't want to duplicate them. I like, sure, I could have made them from scratch, but I didn't want to do that either because, well, they exist. It's right there, you know? So instead of doing that, I asked some of my friends, all right, well, I like Chicken Wrangler, but does anybody else have any other suggestions? And one of my friends told me about Cardio Zombie, and I looked him up and I'm like, oh, hey, this is actually a pretty cool idea. Not only does he just look very unique in terms of his body type, because you don't see this anywhere in Garden Warfare 2 or 1. The closest you get to this is like Gargantua and Super Brains, but Cardio Zombie he's more of like an in-between those characters, so it's still unique regardless. The only thing that was the same about Cardio Zombie was his head. It's the same as the brown coats. Although, instead of just duplicating the brown coat's head, I decided to make it from scratch for the sake of not only just your guys' entertainment, because it wouldn't be that interesting to see me just copy and paste, but also because I kind of value having a sculpt, so that way later on for future videos, if I decide to make a zombie in the GW2 art style for whatever reason, I can just go ahead and duplicate it and voila, you know, I now have like a brown coat head sculpt I can then just model off of. This isn't to say that I didn't struggle a lot with the head. I really did. Oh my god, trying to get it very accurate was super annoying, and I was constantly asking my friends to give me any critiques on the head. Not even just the head, but even the body, because another reason why I was really excited to do this character is because he was very anatomy heavy, and I don't do the anatomy very often, nor have I practiced it as often as I should have. So this was going to be a little bit of a challenge for me, but a very fun one at that. And so I kept on asking a lot of my friends, hey, does this look good? Because I don't know if this is something that you guys do, like for anybody who does art. I don't know if this is something you do, but personally with me, whenever I make something, sometimes I need a fresh new pair of eyes before I can see the mistakes in what I currently have. So sometimes I will deliberately take a break from what I'm working on, so that way the next time I see it, like after 30 minutes, or even a day, I'll be able to see the mistakes a lot clearer, you know? But the problem is like, I wanted to keep on working on it. Like, I didn't want to have to wait like a little bit without looking at it. So I just kept on asking my friends, who did have a fresh pair of eyes, because they weren't always looking at the model, you know? so yeah, but even then, they would also notice some things that I may have just missed, despite not having a fresh pair of eyes, right? It was pretty funny, but I think it got to a point where it looked close enough. Looking at it now, there are still like a bunch of minute details that I could go in and fix. I'm not going to, because I just don't think it's necessary. Maybe in a future sculpt if that's ever called for, but for the time being, I'm fine. As far as the anatomy was concerned, I just pretty much took a look at a lot of reference images on the internet of just the male anatomy. And for any parts of the anatomy that I couldn't really get a good angle on, so for instance, between the arms and the torso, sometimes it's just hard to see like how the bicep looks like from that angle, or perhaps there were just like specific details on like the hands, or sometimes like I could look at my own hands for sure, but I also didn't just want to exclusively look at my own hands because, well, everybody's hands is different, and so I'd like to kind of get like a good median point between my hands and how everybody else's looks. So what I would do is I would also watch like YouTube tutorials on how to sculpt the anatomy, and I would just kind of skip around till it got to the part that I was mainly curious in, and I would see how they would model it. And then what I would do, and you could even see me doing this with the hands, where I would deliberately model them realistically. I would kind of follow the tutorial Not to a T, because this is a different character, of course, but I would follow it enough to the point where it would match the context of my character, and then something would end up looking too realistic. And then after a little bit of time, whenever I was done doing what I was doing, I would then go back, for instance, with the hands. I would go back on the hands, and I would eventually make the fingers just kind of sausage fingers, because that's what the zombies have, you know? They don't have these, like, realistic, skinny-looking fingers. No, they have sausage fingers, especially when it comes to the bigger characters. So, like, I mean, I guess you wouldn't see it with Super Brains because he has gloves, but with Gargantuar, he has, like, very, like, not stubby hands, but the best way for me to describe it is that he has, like, fat hands. That's, like, the best way for me to describe it, you know? Whereas if you compare Gargantuar's hands to, like, browncoats or scientists, you know, one is clearly more malnourished than the other. One thing I decided to do is I decided to leave some of the finer details towards the end. And by finer details, there actually wasn't a lot. It was mainly just the gums, the teeth, the forehead wrinkles, and the nails. And that's pretty much it. Once I was done with that, I was pretty much comfortable with how the base body turned out, which then I can now work off of that and make clothes with it. You know, I've always wondered, as I was making this model, if Cardio Zombie were to be in the game, what would he be and what would he do? But I think ideally he would be a boss hunt, and the way I'd like to imagine the way he works is he would be a very passive boss. In the sense that he doesn't really deal direct damage to you, but rather he could summon like some other cardio zombies, but not like of the same caliber as him, more like just reskin browncoats. And he could pretty much summon them. And of course there would also just be like different AI variety as well, coming from different places. And his gimmick could potentially be like, he runs so fast to the point where you can't deal enough damage to him in time. So the idea is like he would start off with his like treadmill, he'd run around the place, and then he would throw a bunch of brains at the zombies to buff them. And you would need to find, like, let's say, the champion zombie. And this champion zombie could be, like, let's say, the brain supplier or something. And once you take out 3 of them, his treadmill, like, slows down or stops working. And then that's your opportunity to damage him. And then once you damage him enough, you destroy his treadmill, and then that's stage 1 done. Or not even destroy his treadmill, but, like, you weaken it. That's stage 1 done. Stage 2 could be like more or less the same thing, and if you fail to do it, he repairs his treadmill and you're back to square 1. And if you complete it, his treadmill gets destroyed, and now you're on stage 3 where he no longer has his treadmill and he's just kind of sprinting around the map. And maybe you could do like a similar thing again. I'm honestly not too sure what that could be, but pretty much the third time around, it's again, you just get him to a point where like his like weak point is available, and then once you defeat him, and that's the boss hunt. It could be something along the lines of that, but maybe you guys have some better ideas. So now I'm moving on to the clothing, and the first thing I do is I use an automated retopologizer tool to give me cleaner topology to work with. So I start off by masking off the areas in which I want to use as a base for clothing, so you can kind of see that I draw where I want the tank top to be, the armbands, and the pants. Once I'm done with that, I just separate it from that model, get rid of it because I don't need it anymore, and then I start working on the tank top. The tank top was pretty straightforward, to be honest with you. I just start off by getting the general shape I want, and then I start to clean up the main shape of the tank top. Once I'm done with that, I then start to add the wrinkles, and I'm going to be quite honest with you, wrinkles have been something that I've never been good at, and I'll admit, I don't think I did that good of a job here. I wouldn't even go as far to say that I did a good enough job. I mean, maybe there's a chance that it's kind of good enough. I mean, ultimately, that's really for you guys to decide, but I do think that there were better choices I had here, and I didn't really care for the wrinkles as much as I should have. So I'd say for next time I do clothing, or anything that involves wrinkles really, I think I'll do some more of my homework on the wrinkles so that way I can have a better end result. But I think what I have here works. Of course it could be better, and I'm not very proud of it, but it is what it is. But besides that, yeah, really the wrinkles were kind of the only thing I really struggled with the tank top. Beyond that, it was pretty straightforward and pretty easy. And now the shorts were pretty much more or less the same story. Again, I think the wrinkles were a little bit sloppy, but everything else for the most part was fine. So there's not really much else for me to say in that regard. So I'll kind of like skim past that part. The armbands, I had initially had the red part, how do I describe it? I kind of had a different thickness for where the red part of the armband would be compared to the white. There was a little bit more contrast between the two. But then I had a friend I showed this to for opinions tell me that he thought it looked weird. And so I decided to look for some examples of like any type of band in GW2. And taking a look at, I don't know the name of the cosmetic, but it's a head prop for Super Brains. And I'll put it up on screen so you can see what I'm talking about. But it's the one that like, it's a reskin of Party Brains' head prop. That one. That one didn't do that, and I'm like, I know I don't have to like do what GW2 does one for one. Like, part of making these things in the GW2 art style isn't just exclusively basing it off of what they did in GW2. For things that they didn't do in GW2, you kind of have to figure out how to make, such as, for instance, Cardio Zombie's body type, and also how much muscle you want to show with the character. I mean, there's no zombie that shows that much skin outside of like Gargantuar. But even then, Gargantuar has a different build than Cardio Zombie. So with Cardio Zombie, I didn't really have any character to base it off of, so I kind of had to figure that out for myself. And so normally, I hate it when people tell me things like, oh, it's not exactly how it was done in GW, because that's not what determines whether or not it fits the art style. But in this case, not only do I just think it ended up looking better anyways, it was also just easier to do, so whatever. Now, moving on to the shoes. I struggled a lot with the shoes, and that's because with the shoes, I tried poly modeling, which I don't do very often. So I struggled a lot with the shoes, especially just because I don't do shoes that often. But pretty much my general thought process was create the soles of the shoes first, and then kind of shape up everything else beyond that point. And it was kind of working up until I decided to switch off orthographic view as soon as I did that. Yeah, no, just, it was, yeah, no, that's terrible. So, yeah, I just kept on working on the shoes, and I just kept on at it until I got it to a point where I thought I was comfortable enough to tell myself, yeah, I think I'm comfortable enough to fix this in sculpt mode. And so that's exactly what I did. I went from poly modeling to just giving up on that, and then just going over to sculpt mode. And as soon as I started using sculpt mode, I think everything started turning out way better. Again, the wrinkles, I'm not that confident with, although I wouldn't say the wrinkles were as offensive as they were on the tank top and the shorts. I still do think that maybe I could have done a better job. I'm not well educated enough to really say what I could have done, so I just really don't have much of a comment or input on that right now. Just note that I think I could have done a better job. But once I was done with that, pretty much I just used the mask tool to draw out some of the finer details I wanted. Like, for instance, the little circle decal on the side of his shoe. I don't know what you would call this bit, but like, I guess like the brim of the shoe? I don't know what it's called. It probably has a name. I don't know what it's called. But it's not the tongue. I forget. I forget what it's called. But you can see what I'm talking about here. Also, the bottom of the shoe has some nice detail. I even went as far to go ahead and draw a little splat mark on his left shoe. Later, this would end up becoming like kind of, I guess you could say, pea sludge or like pea residue. And I'm not talking about piss. I'm talking about pea shooter. You know, the idea behind that was, you know, he runs on a lawn from PvZ 2, so pea shooter shot him in the foot. You know, it's supposed to be a little bit of a callback to PvZ 2, since the pea shooters are like far shorter in that game than they are in Garden Warfare. And then I would go ahead and draw the details on the bottom of the shoe as well. And then I would work off of that to then create the design that I would end up with here. And then lastly, on the right side of the shoe, I would just go ahead and open up the shoe so that way the, again, I don't know the name, but you know, the soles of the shoe is separated from the top bit of it. And this is just because zombies are a huge fan of having one shoe that's perfectly fine, and then the other one is somehow miscellaneously missing or fucked up. And I really don't know how they all manage to consistently accomplish that, but they do. They do. They never fail to surprise you in that department. I think there's only like a select few characters that don't do that, like Imp. Once I'm done with that, I then move on to the cap, and the cap was a lot easier to work with because it's a less dynamic shape. I didn't even go as far to use sculpting here. I had considered it, but I decided against it because being able to use the edge loops as ways to selecting the edge loops and then duplicating them, converting them to curves, allowing me to then place stitches along the cap was just, it seemed far more convenient for me to just do that than have to like figure out some other way, because with a sculpt the topology isn't clean enough for you to do that, blah blah blah. Yeah, I just utilized a bunch of like edge sliding, not edge sliding, it's edge creasing and sharps to kind of define the shape I want, and then again I ended up using curves to then but I used the curves and tangent with an array to then have these stitches alongside the cap, which just made the process of it a lot easier to work with. Then at the end of it, I created a little hole at the back left side of his cap, because that's what he has on the reference image. And then lastly, I did the shades, and the shades were even easier to work with, so not going to really dwell on it too much. All there really is for me to say here is that it was pretty therapeutic and easy to work on. And now that I had Cardio Zombie's cap done, I can now go ahead and model the beard around his head shape and cap. So I start off by masking out the areas that I want the beard to be in. I then remesh it to give it some more topology to work with, and then I use the inflate tool to kind of bring it out more to give me more space to work with. And then once I'm done with that, I use the clay strips brush to define the general direction of where I want his beard and his hair to go. I start off with the beard first, later on I then move on to the hair, you'll see. And once I'm done with that, I then start defining each individual, not necessarily like hair strand, but kind of like clumps of hair you can think of. I define the clumps of hair with the crease brush, and I think I use some other brushes on top of that. I know I eventually go back and I use a custom brush to add more texture to each hair clump. Now, the reason why I don't have to go all out with the hair and the beard is because my job here is to make it look believable. Now, when I say believable, I'm not saying realistic, but rather something you can kind of look at and go, all right, well, that looks like hair. Like, I can see the general hair clumps. They follow a certain direction. So you should be fine if you just kind of do that with GW hair, and not even just GW hair, but just a lot of stylized hair in general. I know that when working on this beard, I don't know the name of the cosmetic, but I do know that All-Star in Garden Warfare 1 has a beard that was pretty similar to what Cardio Zombie has, so I just decided to not necessarily sculpt it off of that, but just use that as reference to see like, okay, well, how would a regular as beard be handled in the GW art style? Garden Warfare 2 wasn't really a huge fan of good looking cosmetics, so I kind of had to come to GW 1 for that. Now that we're done with all the assets for the sculpt, I go ahead and move on to the texturing, or technically it's vertex painting, because I'm not painting on an image. I'm using the vertex on the sculpt to paint colors. So I start off by giving Cardio Zombie veins, and then I give him these, it's weird. The zombies' heads have different levels of spots. So the ones around the forehead area, the forehead to like eyes area are big. I call them like big spots. But then as you'll see, I then make a bunch of smaller ones. Once I'm done with that, I then paint like a darker shade of his skin color around his mouth. I don't really know what that's supposed to be. I know in Garden Warfare 1, the zombies have like green stains around their mouths. I'm assuming that in GW1 that seems like it's supposed to be like plant sludge, because, you know, the zombies eat plants. I think in Garden Warfare 2, in an attempt to simplify the art style, they, or maybe not simplify, but just use more flat colors. I don't really know why they changed it to be the way it was. Maybe to make it look more in line with PvZ 2. Whatever. But I think in GW2 they tried doing that, but like instead of having the green sludge there, it was just like a darker shade. I don't know. I think it looks kind of ugly if you ask me, but hey man, that's the art style. But later on I then color the mouth, and then I eventually get to the nails, and then I start adding, I guess you could say, shadows almost in some of the darker spots of the model. I don't go too crazy with it, but I do a little bit of it, most notably on the belly button. And then once I'm done with that, that's pretty much his body done. Moving on to his tank top, I crutch on shaders to make it. And later on, I completely change it because the shaders don't look good. They look shit, and you'll see what I mean later on. I unfortunately don't have the recording of it. but I did paint on the pattern, and this time it actually looks like the pattern that's on his tank top in the PvZ2 image. So at least it's more accurate. And then I would also add an outline, or I would draw an outline around his tank top, because GW2 loves giving clothing outlines. And then a callback to what I said earlier, if you remember this in the blast spinner part, I also give his tank top a gradient. I pretty much give every bit of clothing he has a gradient, because pretty much the way GW2's clothing works, and you'll even see me do this with the cap as well. To simplify this, think of 3 layers, alright? So layer 1 is the gradient. It's the base color of whatever you want the clothing to be. Layer 1 is that color, but a gradient. Now, it's usually top to bottom, so it can either start from like light to dark or dark to light. It's whichever you think looks better for whatever you're doing, and it can be inconsistent in the same character. Like the shirt can be light to dark, but then the pants are dark to light. I don't really know why. I literally have no clue why, or what the rule or rhyme or reason for it is. That's just how it is. But that's what layer 1 is, just a gradient top to bottom of whatever color you want. Layer 2 is kind of the patterns or the design, things like that. So any like finer details that you want to paint in, that goes in layer 2. And then layer 3, which is the layer that overrides everything else, on top of everything else, is an outline around your clothing. That, and pretty much the outline, is always brighter. It's always brighter than... It's the base color, but brighter. That's what it is. Now, with the shoes, it was pretty much more or less the same story like I just told you, except the shoes... I guess when I was remeshing at some point, I must have not realized, but the topology decided to shit itself in the back side of the shoe, so I had to go ahead and fix that. But once I fixed that, for me to utilize gradients with shaders, I had to create a mask. And so you'll see here, I start masking out the areas I do not want. I start using black and white to mask out the areas I don't want to get affected by, let's say, the gray gradient or the white gradient. And so I use that mask to then only have the gray gradient appear where the white shows, and then I will do the inverse for, let's say, the blue areas, and same thing with the pea sludge. And I can even use this mask, since I've created it, I can even use this as a way to separate the roughness. So you can see how the pea sludge is actually shinier than the rest of the shoe, because, you know, if you've looked at how pea shooters pea splatter looks like in GW2 or 1 or even BFN, it's usually like a little bit more on the wet side. Then for the right shoe, it is more or less the same thing. I do have to recreate the masks just because it's a separate mesh, so I did that. It wasn't too difficult, it's just the same thing. And once I was done with that, Cardio Zombie is now done. Alright, so the next character I'm working on is Beatboxer. Now, I'm breaking the rules here a little bit. I know Beatboxer isn't a Plants vs. Zombies 2 character, but there were, I think, a few people, or one person, I forget, it was either a few or one person, asking me if I would do unused characters or unused content. I know one of the comments in my last video asked about that, and they specifically mentioned Beatboxer. And I remember right as I was done making Cardio Zombie and I had showed it to a few of my friends, I remember one of my friends was also asking, oh, it would be cool if you did Beatboxer. And funnily enough, I was also just subsequently in the mood to do Beatboxer as well. So ironically enough, Beatboxer just kind of seemed like the next character I wanted to do. So I snuck him in this video. And this was the twist I was talking about in the intro of the video, if you remember. For those who aren't already aware, Beatboxer was a scrapped boss hunt in Garden Warfare 2, and all we really have is his character icon, which is what you're seeing as the reference image in my Blender viewport, and also in Launch GW2 games files, and I think even beta as well, although I'm not too sure about that, you can find template boss hunts for a lot of the unused boss hunt characters, like Imitator, Chili Bean, I think his name is, and some other characters, but I know Beatboxer was one of them. Unfortunately, that's all we really have is just a template boss hunt. We don't actually have Beatboxer in the game. Like, he doesn't have a character model. I don't think he has his own weapons. So I think all that stuff is really up for speculation. All we really know is that he was a boss hunt and his character icon. That's, as far as I'm aware, that's all we know about him. So a lot of the design choices I went with kind of had to be figured out myself. Like, I didn't really have anything else to go off of. To my knowledge, I don't think a single beat exists in PvZ unless it's like a prop, but that's about it. Not like there's no beat character in the Garden Warfare games. There's also just not a lot of one-eyed characters outside of Garlic Drone and Dreadroot and Dreadwood. And you could even see, like, in the earlier stages of me making Beatboxer, I was really struggling with how I wanted not only his proportions to look, but also how do I make his eye look, because it looked really weird at the beginning. And I remember taking a look at Garlic Drone's eyelid and taking a look at Dreadwood and Dreadroot, and I'm like, what if I did a mix of those two? And so that ended up being Beatboxer's face. It was a mix of Garlic Drone's kind of eyelid and Dreadroot's / Dreadwood's eyebrow. And I think it ended up working really well at the end. After that, I started moving on to shaders. Now, I know shaders have been like kicking my ass this entire video, but this is the redemption arc I was talking about. I use shaders so much here. For starters, I figure out how to finally make random spots work. So now I don't have to paint them, I can just use shaders to procedurally generate them for me, and I can customize them to my liking. And oh my god, that's so nice, because then I can also use that information to modify the normal data of each type of spot. I can change the roughness of each type of spot, so I can make the spots shinier than the skin if I wanted to. I know that Chomper kind of does that. I don't know if it's shinier, but I know the roughness of some of the spots on Chomper is different compared to like his skin. So things like that, oh my god, saved me so much time once I finally figured it out. And I even went as far to use the pointiness function off of the geometry node. And pretty much what that is, it's just a curvature map. I was able to use a curvature map to kind of grab the curvature data of the sculpt, and I use that to make the fibers. I don't know if fibers would be the proper term, but it's like the lines that are around like a beetroot. There's like lines all around a beetroot. I'm gonna call those fibers. I don't know if that is the proper term, but you know what I mean. I use that as a way to darken the in-betweens of the fibers, so that way it can be emphasized a little bit more. But it was also nice because any like areas where drawing in, I guess you could say, artificial shadows would be wanted, I can now just have it automatically generated for me. It was so much faster. Furthermore, I'd even use a gradient to make the top of Beatboxer brighter than the bottom. Again, like I said, Garden Warfare loves doing that, so I did it here. And using the same masking technique I used for Cardio Zombie, I used here for the mouth, which was also nice, because then I could create like an entire like shader setup for the mouth separate from the skin without having to assign a completely new material to that bit of geometry, which would have been a headache because I would have had to mess around with selecting the faces of a sculpt. Like, that's just obviously not optimal. So doing this was super nice. And I even used shaders for the leaves as well. I procedurally generated the veins. Well, I didn't just procedurally generate them. I had to kind of create the veins so that I can modify the values to the way I'd like them to be. And then what I did is, again, using the masking technique, I masked out where I wanted the veins to be and where I didn't want them to be. And then, like, I mean, you can see this dude. Like, look, I'm not even painting any of this shit. I'm not even painting any of this. This is all just, like, procedural, bro. It saved me so much time. And it was really fun and addictive just figuring out ways I could use this to my benefit. I even continued to use this for the eyes, bro. The eyes, not a single part of them are painted. It's just shaders. It was super cool. And I'm definitely going to use this a lot more now. And so I think you guys can start to see not only the power of shaders, but also just my redemption arc, all right? I'm finally getting a better understanding of shaders, and this would have saved me so much time when creating the outlines for Cardio Zombie. This would have saved me so much time when making spots for both Cardio Zombie and Blast Spinner, and I'm sure I could have came up with some other ideas had I been more aware about the utility of shaders, but I'm still learning more about them, and I'm sure there's still way more I can do with them. But you can already see that I'm really pushing my boundaries here. Once I'm done with the beatboxer in the middle, I decided to work on the guy on the left. He's the one with the bucket hat. Speaking of which, I start off working on the bucket hat, and the bucket hat is... it's not the same process as the cap, but it was more or less a similar process to what I did for Cardio Zombie, except instead of shaping out a cap, this time I shaped out a bucket hat. I made sure to polymodel this and try avoid using sculpting for this because I would like to keep the topology clean, so that way I can then duplicate the edge loops and apply an array and curve modifier, so that way I can have the stitching follow along, which would be very good for me because then it can perfectly follow along the cap. Or, not the cap, but the bucket hat. Once I'm done with that, I didn't mention this with the Cardio Zombie, but I'll take some time to talk about it here. I used shaders to create the weaving in both the cap and this bucket hat. I make sure not to emphasize the weaving too much, so that way the hat still looks pretty simple, all things considered, since this is the Garden Warfare 2 art style, and with the cosmetics, it's more about like flat colors and gradients than it is texture. But of course, I eventually do go over the weaving with another gradient, as you can see. Once I'm done with that, I then clear a hole at the top of the bucket hat, so that way there's room for the top of the beetroot's root to stick out of, which, in case you didn't notice, the beetroots are actually upside down. Notice how the top of the beetroot is actually the bottom, and the bottom is actually the top of their head. Once I'm done with that, I then start going a little bit off script here. I know this isn't accurate to what the icon looks like, but I'm not going to lie to you, this was too cool of an idea for me to pass up on, so I took it. And a lot of my friends, when they saw what I was doing, told me that this is a good idea and I should move forth with it. And so I did. And what I'm talking about here, and you can probably already see what I'm doing, I decided to change the proportions and the color of this beat because I felt like it gave it more personality. I know that the bucket hat and the different eye color is a way of differentiating this beat from the other beats, but I don't know, I feel like this is such a nice touch to give to this character, and I would eventually do that for the guy on the right, and you'll see what I do for him when I get to that. But I think that this turned out really nice, and I'm really happy about how it turned out. I would also later go back on the main beat, the guy in the middle, and I would also readjust his lips, because I didn't like how the lips looked like originally. They always looked kind of off to me, and so once I refined how this guy looked, I kind of realized, oh, well, this guy's lips look better. Let me go ahead and do something similar. Not the same, but similar to the guy in the middle, so that way the guy in the middle looks better, but still looks different. After I'm done with the beatboxer on the left, it's now time to work on the last beatboxer, which is the one wearing the cap. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys, and I know I made an entire case about how I didn't want to do Chicken Wrangler because I didn't want to copy and paste the chicken from GW. I copy and pasted Cardio Zombie's cap here. I won't lie to you. I may or may not have done that. Now, okay, in my defense, not only do I not think it would have been interesting to see me 3D model a cap a second time in a row, but it was also just going to save me a lot more time, and there was really no reason not for me to do that. And even then, there was still some modifications I had to make to the cap, mainly just proportional changes and texture changes, but still changes nonetheless. But pretty much the main challenge here was just fitting the cap to his head. And when I was doing that, I accidentally had auto merge for vertexes enabled. So some of the stitches became a little bit fucky, so I had to go back in and fix that, which wasted a little bit of time, but I got it working for the most part, so we're fine now. But once I'm done with that, I pretty much just modify the shaders that I made for Cardio Zombie's cap. And once I was done with that, I just cut a hole at the top of his head so then I could allow for his root to stick out. I was actually debating on either having it coming from the front or the top, because I remember there was a little bit of a debate amongst my friends as to whether or not the root was popping from the front of the cap or the top of the cap. Ultimately, we decided that it was popping up from the top of the cap, and right now the design for the root looks a little bit too wiggly. Wobbly wiggly sorry. But we eventually, or at least I eventually simplify it more so that way it's not it's not too long, and it's also just not too all over the place. And I think that once I'm done with that, it looks a lot more comfortable. So then I just go ahead and make some of the finishing touches. And once I'm done with that, I start working on the broccoli. I make the broccoli, and then I create the wrap that holds the beatboxers together, and that's pretty much the sculpt done.